what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power.
Hey, John, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I lost my voice last week, so I'm glad that we weren't doing the podcast last week. But it's come back, so I'm ready to go. Thanks, Peter. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. To start most of these podcasts, I like to start by diving into the person and the why and what motivates them to do the work that they do today. So if you could maybe just start by a little introduction.
Yeah, in terms of my why, I always start my workshops on the Trusted Executive telling my story about the why, following Simon Sinek's start with why principle. And so if we can indulge a little bit in that, my why on trust goes back 18 years to my last corporate role. So 18 years ago, I was international managing director in a company called Logico, which is a 40,000 person global software company. I'd been in that job 2 weeks. And it was a Monday morning. I'm walking down the corridor of London's head office just next to Euston, the 9th floor where all the bosses sit. And walking towards me that morning is my boss, the group chief executive, who shall remain nameless for the purpose of this story. And he came up to me and said, how's it going, Blakey? And I said, it's going great. The day before, we'd sold the biggest deal we'd ever sold in my sector, £32 million outsourcing deal with Lotus Cars. And he said, you think that's good, do you? And I don't know whether it was naivety or bravery, but, probably naivety because I'd only been in the job 2 weeks. I decided to stand my ground. I said, yeah, I think it's great. And at that point, a finger went out and went straight into my face and a voice boomed in my ears, your problem, Blakey. And I thought, no, but I'm clearly about to be unveiled of a lifetime's ignorance in that department. You're too effing nice. And he walked off. And I'm stood there, 21st century, FTSE 100 company, thinking my biggest problem is I'm too effing nice. And Peter, that's really the trigger that sparked my passion for demonstrating that we have to give people a bigger vision than just being nasty or nice in leadership. We have to set the bar higher and be more creative about what great leadership looks like than simply telling people they're too nasty or they're too nice. And my belief is that is summed up by an author on trust called Charles Green, who said, what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power. And I felt that day my boss was telling me to trust in power. And I rebel against that. I have to believe that there is a better way in the 21st century than trusting in power as the currency of your leadership. So my mission and the mission of the Trusted Executive Foundation and all the work we do is to attract leaders who share that why, who want to stand for trust and are willing to do the hard work to understand what that means in practice as well as in theory.
So looking at the work that you do today, what does that mean in practice as well as in theory?
Well, yeah, great question. Trust is a big, vague, emotive word. We all think it's important. We all think it's critical. Lots of great sound bites about trust. But how do you role model it? How do you put it into action? And that was the focus of my research at Aston Business School, was to put myself back in the classroom, do a doctorate focused on identifying the behavioral habits that inspire trust, particularly the behavioral habits of senior leaders that inspire trust. So I can share now with you and our listeners and everybody else 9 habits that I know, and the science will confirm, that if you routinely demonstrate these habits, you will inspire trust in the people that you lead. So to me, it's about having good habits. That's how you put it into practice. And the science can help us with that. Models can help us with that. But we all know that changing our habits is more difficult than just reading a book.
So if we look at these 9 habits that you mentioned, like what are they specifically?
Well, they fall under 3 pillars. It's quite hard to remember 9 habits, but it's easy to remember 3 pillars. And these 3 pillars of trust have been in the research for years. I didn't create the three pillars. The three pillars of trust are ability, integrity, and benevolence. So to be trusted, you need to be competent at what you do. You need to have your ethics and your values, which is the integrity piece. And then you need this third word, benevolence. Benevolence comes from the Latin benevolence. It's wishing well for others, common human care, compassion, kindness. That's as important in inspiring trust as is competency or integrity. So these three pillars, ability, integrity, benevolence. And in my research, I wanted to get at the behavioral habits underneath those pillars. And there are 3 habits of ability, 3 habits of integrity, 3 habits of benevolence.
So it's interesting as well, because when you're talking about like integrity and like the pillars that kind of form trust, it's interesting when you like look at pillars, for example, the Nolan's principles in government, those the 7 principles that they have there. How do you then take the challenge of translating those pillars into action? Because often it's trying to take things from statements, visions, values from paper to reality, and also having controls in place to mitigate those that are willing to just dishonor those requirements.
So I think, if you follow the trail of going from theory to practice, you start with trust, you then have your 3 pillars. And then there are these 9 habits. Now, if I pick one of the habits as an example, so an example of a habit in the pillar of ability is, the first habit is deliver. Deliver on time, to budget, to quality. That is a habit that inspires trust if you do that on a consistent basis. Now, in the research and in our work with trust, we can also now go even further and say, what are the behaviors, the specific day-to-day behaviors under that habit of delivery? So we have a self-assessment questionnaire and a sort of leadership survey tool that will ask people, when you look at your manager's behaviors under this heading of delivery, do you see somebody who is careful when they make promises? So, somebody who under-promises and over-delivers. Do you see someone who has a system for the delegation and execution of tasks? That element of accountability, and that they follow up, that they have a system that ensures efficient delivery. The third behavior under that particular habit, do you see that your leader goes above and beyond what is expected of them in their key relationships? So do they go the extra mile? So once we get to that level of detail behaviorally on each of these 9 habits, we start to be able to measure trust, to assess it, to raise people's understanding of it, to measure it, and to track progress over time, because we've got something that is sufficiently practical and tangible that, you can work with it at that level.
There's a lot of narrative at the moment about the erosion of trust capital. What do you think have been the key trigger points to that in respect to the society in which we live in?
Yeah, key trigger points on the erosion of trust. I think transparency is a big word when it comes to trust. There's a quote by a lady called Fiammetta Borgia, which I really like, she said that transparency is destroying the opaque lives of organizations. The more we know, the more we want to know, and the more there seems to be to disclose. So we, as a consuming public, are digging to get to the truth. And we have so many more tools now with which to do that than we ever did in human history. So we are hungry to expose anything that isn't trustworthy. And what we're finding is that the more we dig, the more we find. And so I think that collective exposure is undermining trust. Again, I'm going to give you another quote. It's Warren Buffett quote about, when the tide goes out, it's easy to see who's been swimming naked. Now, the tide has gone out. The tide has gone out, and we are looking around and we are seeing lots of people skinny dipping, and we're going, hang on a minute, this isn't right. This isn't what we were told. This isn't what we expected. And there is a collective, I think, sort of rebellion against that going on that says we need something better than that.
Yeah, it's true. I thought when you were going to quote Warren Buffett, you were going to talk about it takes a long period of time to build trust, but a second to break it. But yeah, like to use your sea analogy, like the seas of change is very much upon us, and people are asking for more. They're expecting more. We're seeing kind of a change in the assessment piece is key, right? So if you look at things like how you assess success historically, we've often looked to the markets and we've often looked at the FTSE and saw like share price being as a key indicator for the success and strength of a company. But now I think we're moving beyond that. I think we're going to start seeing more matrix being created, such as things like the Purpose Power Index, whereby we're able to hold people accountable for their actions and what they say and what they believe in and what they value. And through that, people, you drive real value into the communities and consumer bases in which you serve, both inside your organization and out. And I'm more intrigued as to how that evolution is going to take place and what it's going to involve, and how within existing power struggles that's going to form and formulate into the market themselves. Because you can fully imagine, akin to your example at the beginning, where you're too effing nice, and that kind of the toxic masculinity and the power struggles. What's your viewpoint on those pieces that I've mentioned?
Yeah, well, I'm right with you in terms of that actually the way you talk about it is that it's a bit of a battle. This is a battle. I mean, it's interesting because I talk now about there's a war going on in Ukraine, and what is it a war between? It's probably a war ultimately between trust and power, between autocracy and freedom and democracy. So you follow these words, and when you immerse yourself in this topic, as I do, you see that war going on everywhere. You see it in schools, you see it in families, you see it in businesses. I mean, my focus is business, but I see it everywhere. And I joke that every week I get a new case study, because the war will flare up somewhere every week, because there is a tension that's arising around this changing sea. As the seas are changing, the paradigm shift. And one of the ways that you talk about that there was about purpose, success. The way we define success, it used to be about profit, and then that translated into GDP, and life was simple, and we all sort of bought into it, and it sort of worked for a time. But I think now people are expecting a broader contribution. It's not just profit, it's about people, it's about planet. And we are now expecting businesses to navigate from that old world to that new world. And some are going willingly, some are pretending that they're going, but they're not actually changing anything. And some are kicking and screaming, saying, we don't like this and we don't want to change. And I think it is a real critical time in the evolution of leadership in business, but also you could say more generally.
Yeah, and I think this like challenge, this conflict that we're seeing, it's not like it's new either, because if we kind of look back to the evolutions of history and the various different changes that's taken place from an economic model down to even a political viewpoint, there's always been changes and driving factors that have led to, I've said it before, but like crisis is often the catalyst for change. And in respect to what we see at the moment, there's an awful lot of crisis and turbulence. And ultimately, I think to kind of go beyond that and go more towards a solution, companies, people, individuals, ourselves, we need to start having more of a clear vision about the future and what we want that future to be and what it represents and how we can go about creating it. Because like I won't go too political into this, but like from a political persuasion in the UK, the challenges that we're seeing now are similar to the challenges if you look back to like the early 90s, 95, 96, and then ultimately the election that took place in 97. And the narratives have changed that were being put forth by the opposition party at the time. Like Britain deserves better and new Labour, new hope. This kind of desire for hope is there again. Like, people are looking at the turbulence that we see throughout society, and they just want to kind of have hope. They want to be shared a vision that's more hopeful rather than hopeless. And I think in respect to that, there's an awful lot can be done from the dynamics of business, because like technology has advanced at such a pace that the old ways of power, of leadership, of the bastions of power, then they're no longer there anymore. Like the ones that actually lead countries are corporations, and therefore the ones that are going to drive the true change that society needs are corporations. So it's up to business leaders now to have clear visions as to, that Simon Sinek golden circle, rather than go from the how and the what and the outer circles. It's actually focused centrally on the why. Like, why do you even exist? What are you trying to achieve? And what movements and what processes and what ways are you going to galvanize movements for change, both inside your organization and externally? Because then you're going to be able to mitigate against factors that we see in the market, such as like the grand resignation, or even wider factors that we see in society, such as the loss of trust capital in governments and media. It's not just the UK that's facing this, it's globally. But ultimately, like, rather than just go on and on and on about like the issue of a loss of trust and a lack of trust, what is the alternate vision that's being put forth? And in your view, what does that entail?
Well, again, totally with you. We need a new vision. Business is well qualified. Global business is well qualified to step forward and be brave to articulate that vision. In the past, they didn't think it was their job to do that. They thought that their job in society was wealth generation, and that was that. If you're CEO now of a global company, you've got a different job than you had 10 years ago. And your job includes activism around a purpose and an agenda that is bigger than making money. Of course, you still need to make money, but you need to then say, how are we contributing beyond that? And I think you do see brave leaders stepping into this space. So I was very chuffed, really, that a guy called Paul Polman wrote the foreword for my book, The Trusted Executive, because Paul Polman, the former chief executive of Unilever, to me, he was the guy who back in 2009 decided that he was going to commit Unilever to a different path, the sustainable living plan, as he called it at that time. It's a genuine triple bottom line vision: people, profit, planet. And he is committed, and he did commit, and the legacy is still there for Unilever to start pioneering down this path and measuring its success equally, with equal focus on the profit, the people, and the planet. And I think, there are companies like Unilever that are looking to demonstrate that this isn't just about a moral imperative, but actually it's about good business. It's about what works. It's practical. And we're now seeing a huge investment bandwagon, the ESG, environmental social governance investment sort of focus that is prioritizing the investment of funds into companies that are moving in this direction, because the investors have now worked out that the risks are greater from standing still than they are from moving forward. And so they are beginning to back the pioneers. And now that's happening. You're going to see an accelerating trend of companies that work this out and that decide to commit to this path. I think that's exciting. I think that is something we should be optimistic about. And we just want to keep encouraging business leaders to seize the moment, to get on the pitch and take up this vacuum, the vacuum that's being left by traditional politics and traditional businesses and traditional leadership. We want these leaders to come forward now, fill that vacuum, give us a vision that gets us out of bed on a Monday morning, fully committed. And there's lots of people waiting to follow that.
Yeah, like to kind of go beyond the us versus them narratives and all the various different conflicts and turmoil and crisis that we face on a day-to-day basis. Like, people just need to remember, and business leaders and individuals ourselves, we all need to remember the need to rekindle value and what values represent us as individuals, what values represent the businesses at which we work for and operate, and how clear are those values and beliefs being articulated to the wider societies in which we live, operate and serve. And also because of those needs for clarity and those needs to kind of articulate change, we're very much just in that education point where people are kind of being reawoken to what is possible and what the future may hold. Like, it's so exciting. If you just look at the mergers and acquisitions that's taken place in the sector that I'm more closely aligned to, which is a computer game sector, like, there's so much innovation and there's so much like hope and optimism that is available within the rise of the like technology and technological advancement. And I think also people need to understand the power and the benefit of tribes and communities, because if we look at communities as a whole, like, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So naturally, if you are articulating clear narratives in which resonate with people's values and beliefs, you're more likely to draw them into your community, your tribe, and create a following that you can kind of utilize for the benefit of all. And if you kind of look at that, then we also have to look at the evolution of history and how historically the human population has developed through like that tribe mentality. I can't remember the name of the book, but I'll put a link in the episode to the book that I'm talking about. But the book Tribes, like, it's an amazing book, and you look at how that evolves and how like collective benefit for all. I guess like we've spent quite a long period of time like looking at these individually focused viewpoints, and I think it's to the detriment because, just look at the pandemic, right? If things like neoliberalism and capitalism was going to work in its existing frameworks of Milton Friedman and providing shareholder value above anything else, then things like pandemics would not have played out in the way that it did play out. So if we start looking at the fact that everybody is a vested shareholder in your company, and everybody has a vested interest in the growth and development and sustainability of your company, then we have more of we've got more of an opportunity to build trust, more of an opportunity to create real engagement rather than simply sales. And because of that, we have more of an opportunity to be more visionary and look towards the future and see what's possible and like actually articulate and implement actions for change that's going to be for the, that's going to actually drive society forward rather than kind of be in this perpetual loop of like negativity that we see at the moment. And I truly believe that some of the leaders that, it's playing out in today anyway, some of the leaders that we have, they're just not fit for purpose. So, the turmoil that's going on in Ukraine with like Putin, like that's just crazy. Like that guy's just not fit for purpose. And you look at like the UK, or you look over at what happened in America with like Trump, they're not visionary. They don't have a vision of the future. They're just about creating individual wealth and for the benefit of themselves above others. And I think, society is calling them out. It's calling out weak leaders. It's calling out people that lie, and it's very evident who they are. And, we don't have to spend too much time looking and critiquing at these particular people. What we need to do is focus more about the future. So it's like, rather than like spend your time thinking about the past, like it's about building the future. And that's what I think we should be focusing on.
Yeah. And you use that word, I've used it. That's exciting. That's creative. It's time to architect something new. And I think people who have that seed of leadership in them, that should really excite them, that, wow, what a time. When is there a time when you have such a blank sheet on which to create this vision and such a need and such a crying out for it, and I do believe, that vacuum, nature hates a vacuum, that those leaders will step in, they will appear. It won't be me and people of my generation, but the best that people like me and my generation can do is create the opening and create the air cover, if you like, to allow those new leaders to step forward and create the opportunity. But it's for a younger generation to seize that opportunity. And I don't know what your view on this is, Peter, but I do sometimes worry about the boldness and the bravery that's required, to step into this. And I'm amazed that young people are not more agitated and active and expressing their voice strongly on this topic. I do worry at times there's a sort of nihilism that has taken grip that is persuading people that change isn't possible or it's not worth it, or Why me? And I just hope that spell is sort of broken, and that the younger generation brings this vision forward much better than I can, and really goes for it.
No, it's definitely there, right? But the challenge that we face at this current point in time is, number one, existing frameworks whereby people have benefited through the retention of power. The existence is still there. Like, power in the old ways was power created wealth, and wealth creates a voice. And ultimately, if you're able to control the narrative, then you can control an awful lot about how society and how society works. But ultimately, beyond that, I think where we as a generation can kind of go forward is not just looking about purpose, but actually activating movements for change. And it comes down to simple visions, and the fact that, like Socrates said it back in the day, in respect to the secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old but on building the new. So if we're able to kind of have that as a central why, like akin to Simon Sinek's golden circle, if we focus centrally on the why, then we can build out from there. And it's about, at this present point in time, it's about bringing people together into their tribes, into sectors that they have shared beliefs, values, goals with, that they can kind of create progression through and create like change through. I think also you've got to look at the fact that, look at like Naomi Klein's disaster capitalism, or you look at Timothy Schneider's pseudo-populism and his new book around unfreedom. Like, there's an awful lot of like, if you're able to perpetuate constant cycles of crisis, then it's almost on a day-by-day basis, people are reacting to that particular crisis and that particular turmoil. And then the next day comes a new crisis, a new turmoil, and you create the aggression and you create like the annoyance about that particular topic. But because it's so frequent and because it hits home on a day-by-day basis, like recently, we often see a multitude of crises in a singular day, while historically we would have seen like one over the course of a much larger duration. I think the challenge that we face now is like, do we get ourselves bogged down in the crisis that we face and having to provide like a reactive response to each an individual narrative, or are we able to take on board those as learnings and take on board these crises as kind of almost like just noise in the background, that we're able to then draw on these experiences to highlight as like beacons to say that, look, these are the elements that make me untrusting of society, and these are the things that I want to do going forward to mitigate these particular risks. And that just brings back into the focal point. Are we as individuals wanting to change and wanted to be more proactive in part of this change journey that's very much upon us at this point in time, or are we going to just let ourselves get bogged down in the continuation of the perpetual loops of crises? For me, when I wake up in the morning, I wake up like galvanized, because I want to be part of this change. I want to be part of the progression. I want to drive the change that I want to see in the world and focus more towards the future rather than on the past. And I think, like if you have that change in your own individual mindset, then my God, be prepared for a real awesome journey ahead.
Well, yeah. So let me ask you a question on this. Let me ask you a question, Peter, on this theme, because I agree with, again, everything you're saying there. But I don't underestimate the seductiveness of the information agenda that is pumped into people's minds every day. I don't underestimate the sophistication and seductiveness of media, and how it can entrain us, and how it can consume us. And a lot of what you talking about there is almost like willpower, that in the morning, I'm going to get up and I'm going to ignore all of that. And I'm going to commit myself to the future and to being part of this creating of a new future. I think that doing that in practice and protecting yourself from that constant bombardment that is trying to hijack your thinking mind, I think that is a hugely difficult job, which many of us are not as prepared for as we think we are. And we're not as, however strong our will is, our psychology is such that we're quite easily manipulated. And I think we need to get much, much better. If we want to form a tribe, let's form a tribe that is helping each other to understand how we protect ourselves from that manipulation, how we, on a daily basis, what is the discipline and the practices that allow us to stay sort of with a clean and clear mind that can still put energy into a strategic future direction rather than being hijacked by an emotive, reptilian sort of crisis, feeling.
I think, I did I totally resonate with what you're saying about like the behavioral change. And because of this particular topic, I chatted to Dr. Grace Lawden on, she's just recently brought out a book called Think Big. And the topics that we were discussing are things like mindset, right? So as individuals, do we have a fixed or a growth mindset? Figure that out. Like if you've got a fixed or a growth mindset, and if it's fixed, are you happy in it being a current fixed mindset, or do you want to grow? And if you want to start like looking at development individually, then, like look at the version of yourself at this present point in time. Are you happy in your current lifestyle? If you are, that's cool. Like I'm not telling everybody to change. I'm just asking people to think holistically, like, are they happy? And if they're not happy, then there's ways of developing, like akin to Dr. Grace, like there's ways of developing your Me Plus and applying it to your daily life. Also, like one of the key components to any successful change is consistency. Like I'm not telling you to like close your eyes to all of the media around you. Like I consume like media from here, there and everywhere because I want to understand what are my challenges and I want to understand what is the opportunities that's ahead of us. So you're building out like the understanding of all forms of narrative, of all forms of like the story that's taking place in front of us. So the challenges of those that are kind of trying to suppress people's viewpoints to, be almost like subservient to a regime, then fine. Like we're aware of them. Like go read George Orwell's books, go read, like just educate yourself. Or if you want to look at like developing yourself, then there's loads you can kind of look upon there. And like, I think the crux of where we are at the moment, it comes down to the individual, right? We can all profess about what we want to see in the future, but who's going to act? Like, and the reason that I created things like the podcast and the reason I engage with people like yourselves and the other guests that we've had is because I'm really intrigued as to the work that you guys are doing and the knowledge that you have to share in respect to this tribe that we're evidently building within Purpose Made. Because I think that if you're able to kind of have, more positive viewpoints in how to actually action these things that you want to take place, because that's often the struggling point. Like people often struggle as to, how do I actually action this particular change that I want to go on? And also, you get highs and lows. Like it's a long journey ahead. So rather than focus on the final destination, which I think a lot of people, when they're going through change, both individually or within organizational transformations and change, they often get like too focused in the final destination and don't appreciate the current point in time that they're at in their own change journeys or their own organizational change journeys. And I just want to encourage people to not feel so low, not feel so down. Like, I've been there. I know what it's like. You just need to listen back to some of our episodes on mental health and why I've decided to follow this pathway. And like, my God, it's amazing when you get on this journey. So like, I'm just wanting to encourage more to do so. And if you're untrustworthy of situations, don't feel like you can't do nothing. Like everybody has an opportunity to change. But is there anything that you'd like to like leave as a lasting comment or a key quote or a key concept or something that you think that our audience would really appreciate at this point in time?
I suppose I need to witness for our listeners that it's true that over a 5-10 year period, it is amazing what you can do. So like 10 years ago, I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning, 18 years ago, I was international managing director in a FTSE 100 company. I was 38 years old. And you're thinking, okay, that was pretty cool, right? At that time in terms of that 10 year period. But then after that exchange with my boss, I decided to commit myself to something new, a new path. And I let go of that completely. I gave that up. And a lot of people thought I was mad to give up what I gave up then. But from that day to this day, climbing another mountain over 10 years, over 15 years, over 18 years. So, I can look back and say there's a doctorate there. There's a book there. There's a not-for-profit business there that has contributed £185,000 to, UK Christian-led charities that are inclusive at the point of need. These things keep me motivated and keep me engaged and keep me feeling that I'm in some small, vague way part of the solution rather than part of the problem. However imperfect I am, I do feel part of a tribe. And I find that very rewarding to feel that way. And over a period of time, you can achieve incredible things if you keep that consistency, you keep that focus, and you just keep walking forwards, trusting that sort of compound interest approach with your life and your purpose, that the compound interest, it works for money, but it also works for purpose and for fulfillment in life. If you can get focused on a passionate vision and be consistent and disciplined in the implementation of that, and the tribe that you're surrounding yourself with that keeps you standing up when you hit the really difficult days. So a lot of it is just summarizing, what we've said, Peter. And my work on trust is my little thread that I'm putting into the tapestry there. We haven't talked actually in detail about that, but I think more importantly, what's emerged is that put your thread into the tapestry. Put your thread into it, find it, and weave it into it, and keep weaving it into it, and trust that there are other people working on that tapestry in their own way, whether the word's purpose or whether the word is trust, or whether the word is, climate change, or whatever the word is, that this future that we're talking about is being crafted by many, many hands that all are trusting that they're not alone, and that their bit will count.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way to finish. So thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for listening to the Purpose Made podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to Purpose Made wherever you normally get your podcasts to hear the latest news and views. You can also find and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter, or contact Peter directly to connect, inquire about Purpose Made, or request to be featured on the podcast. We look forward to welcoming you back soon for another episode.